Welcome to the Equipping Leaders Podcast Leader Study Series. I'm Natasha, a leader development professional and overall leadership enthusiast.
And I'm Corey, a program manager and emerging people leader, and thus a leadership enthusiast.
We are doing a leader study of the TV show Z Nation, deconstructing the leaders, decisions, and team dynamics of the characters on the show to look at how leadership is all around us. And even if we're not in a position of leadership, we can still demonstrate it in our actions, responses, and opportunities.
Z Nation aired from 2014 to 2018, but if you haven't seen it yet, there will be spoilers in these episodes. In this episode, we're talking about Season 3, Episode 4, El Scorpion, and The Red Hand. Let's jump in.
So we are well into Season 3, and now we're on Episode 4, and we're starting to get more answers about the Red Hand and a Scorpion, because as we know, Hector is part of Warren's team now, and he was a Scorpion. So now there's this group that's still operating seemingly independent of a leader, right? If we are to believe that a Scorpion is still Hector. And what I loved about this too, just kind of as I was thinking about it going in, was there are times when you're in a position of leadership where maybe you said something in the past, or there was a way of doing things in the past that you initiated, or that people assume with a certain type of position, that then they carry forward with things whether you said to or not. So I think that's something really important for leaders to remember, that it's like your words have weight, and they have way more weight, and they have way more interpretations than you initially think that they will. But I will turn it over to you. What were some of your thoughts about from this episode?
I love everything you said about all of that. I do think in the beginning, and I think it's funny because I think I know why you glossed over it, but that's okay. Is we have in the very, very beginning, we get, the Red Hand, that piece, but then we also go to, what is he calling it? Murphytown?
Murphytown.
Murphytown. We're in Murphytown. Murphy's there, and he's sort of like, it opens up and he's just having this sort of, let's call it a sync meeting, for lack of a better word, with some of his closest, like, original towns members, right? The sort of his cronies. And what I think is so interesting is they are like, one of the guys built a moat, right? For the zombies, he's like, I built it exactly to your specifications. And, the other guys, like, oh, this is, then Murphy's like, oh, this little hanging thing is too low, right? Make it higher. But it was like the level of micromanagement, right? Like, I built it to your exact specifications, I make it like, with, as they're trying to like produce their own like Murphy power control vaccine, I'm making exactly the number of doses that you wanted. And so it's like this weird, like, they're all vying for his favor, but it's far more like a Roman emperor than it is like a leader, right? He's not empowering people to do what needs to be done. He's very much micromanaging. He's double checking on everything. And it's like, oh God, have I worked for that guy before?
Well, that's such a great point, especially that micromanagement. It's like he wants like different people to come and support it, but only support in the way that he says, when he says, and how he says. So he's not actually interested in other people's genius or other people's contributions. It's just, how does it further my own ends? So that's a really great call out.
Yeah. That was the big thing too, was I don't know. I also realize that sometimes as a leader, you have to be very direct, right? You need to give clear-cut guidance and instruction to somebody. But I think that's a slippery slope, right? Maybe a form or something, right? It has to be filled out a very specific way. And it's important for people to know how to do that. But build a zombie moat, pretty abstract, right? Sure, people can figure it out themselves. Just gotta circle the thing with zombies, right? So it's like, to go into that level of specificity, that it needed to be called out, like, I built it to your exact specifications. Oh boy, kind of crazy. So yeah, that was a big thing to me. But then the other thing too, with the Red Hand being there or not being there, what I think is interesting too is it's also a shift, because the first time we meet them, it was the Red Hand had like sort of like captured some thieves, some people that were stealing things, and like, had punished them for that. So the shift from what the red hand was, or the shift from like what we were tracking, like we haven't seen anybody doing that yet, right? Like some sort of mob, not mob justice, but I guess, yeah, you know what I mean? Like implementing civility through uncivil ways. So I think that's like an interesting, they've standardized in this life thing. So I thought that was kind of, I think that's a whole different type of like leadership now, because it's very subjective to the person who's deciding what's good and what's bad.
It's kind of like that whole concept behind that movie, and there are other movies like this, but like that movie, The Boondock Saints, where it's like, or like even the TV show Dexter, right? Something where it's like you're doing something that is seemingly good for society. It's good for civility, but you said it really well, but you're doing it in a really uncivil way. You're doing it in a really violent way that actually goes against how a society should run. Because typically a society should run that, like, if we're all doing this type of thing, nobody should get hurt and everybody should benefit from it. So obviously in a situation like that, not so much. And then it kind of comes into like, yeah, who decides and how far can it go? So yeah, we're getting to know more about the Red Hands, who, yeah, at this point, they almost view, none of them have said this, but they almost view themselves as recreating justice, reordering the world when there is a chaos.
Yeah, I'm excited, obviously knowing how it goes. The way that all plays out, I think is really interesting, because I think it takes a certain type of person to buy into that sort of idea, and it's not necessarily always the best type of people, and it's like a fear control thing, right? It's, well, at least if I'm with them. So yeah, I enjoy that. I also think, so when we go back, back to Murphy Town, and when the doctor puts that injection into 10K's neck with like the Z1 virus that breaks the Murphy spell, I thought that was really interesting, because she's pseudo under that control. So I think it shows like a lot of mental strength that she was able to break that, which suspension of disbelief type thing. But I also think it was like a lot of courage and trust in 10K to free him from that control as well. Now, she didn't really get 10K's consent, but he also wasn't himself, so to speak. But I thought that was really, like, as a teammate, when you see somebody like a leader, or something that's being maybe a little bit too controlling, or something that's not going great with somebody on the team, I think having that courage to like confide with them or speak up for them, I thought that was pretty cool too.
Yes. Yeah. When we go back to the Murphy compound, also something else that's not helping our case with Murphy at all, and his egomaniacal dictatorship, is that now he has squatters outside his compound. People have heard about him. They know he can bite people and in their minds save them, save their families, and all of that. So that doesn't help when you have somebody who's already an egomaniac, who's already a micromanager, and who is a leader who isn't really a leader. He's in a position of authority, and then like who wasn't brought up as a leader, right? Like leaders are made. And so he hasn't been made into that in any way yet. So to see him like kind of navigating that, and then these other things happening where you're like, oh boy, this is only going to feed the side of him that we don't need fed. We need to feed this other side of him that teaches him the humility and the genuine care for others. But that's why I love that contrast with even 10K, like just fighting against him. We know he is not a fan of Murphy's because of all the stuff with Cassandra, but and other things. But it is, you're absolutely right. It's hard when you see somebody doing the wrong thing, but there's part of a system that benefits you, right? It's kind of like, I don't want to get like political or social issues, but when people talk about like capitalism or any of those things, it's like, yeah, the reason why people don't break out of it is because it benefits them. And so in organizations, if you're worried about your job or your reputation or how you're going to feed your family or something, you are in a very precarious position where, yeah, am I going to fight against this? And so instead, when you're like, oh no, these things are not right, how do I do that? And how do I find allies within this organization? Like with Dr. Murch and 10K, how do I find an ally that I can trust and share this with. So that's a really great point.
Yeah. It's just that this whole, like you'd said, this egomania thing where, you know, they're like you're talking about, right? They're like, bite me, and he's like, well, I can't bite everyone, and now it's like, well, then we would all die, right? If I saved this one person, we would all die. So it's like this like godlike complex that he's developing, and with them now shouting like, oh, have mercy on us and everything else. I think that's interesting because mercy has a lot of different meanings in this version of the world right now.
Yeah.
And so I just think that that's not necessarily a leadership thing, but I think when you're talking about what outside circumstances, or even internal to your environment, sort of meld you into the leader that you are within an organization, things like that. I think we don't often think about that, because sometimes I think you could have the best intentioned leader in a bad environment end up becoming not a great leader, and vice versa, right? You could have maybe somebody who's not the strongest leader, but it is in a really good environment, become a great leader. So I think, I think it's something that also, for me, as I'm sort of growing on my leadership journey, like it's hard because you've got other things to worry about, but being cognizant, taking that step back and like looking at the environment, the people that you work with, your other more senior leaders, your leadership peers, the teams you're working with, the missions, the goals, the environment, like that has a lot to do with, sometimes you snap, right? Sometimes you let something go that you shouldn't let go. And then you sit back and you do, what in the environment made me think that was okay? You know what I mean? What was that? So, yeah.
Yeah. And was it because there's that reflection. I'm glad you brought that up, that reflection of, what was it in the environment? And how do I fortify myself in the future? How do I prepare myself so that when this occurs again, because it will. It's like I always tell people, like, difficult conversations, you don't just get to have one in your career and then that's it. It's constant, right? You're always doing that. So how do you fortify against change? And I shouldn't say against, how do you fortify so that you can adapt to change, so that you can have difficult conversations, so that you can be both a great people leader and a great business leader? So they're not mutually exclusive. They're, put together.
Yeah.
And with Murphy too. So there's a lot of interesting little things that happen here that also show us the lengths that he's willing to go to maintain control. So Dr. Murch, when he realizes that she is helping 10K and 10K goes to get her so that they can leave together, he sees that Murphy has rebitten Dr. Murch, right? So to whatever it was that was wearing off, Murphy made sure that it was not. And so he rebit her. And then what's super interesting too is with Murphy still not understanding why what he is doing is so damaging. When 10K tries to escape with Dr. Murch, Murphy says, I'm just trying to help you. Right. So in his mind, he's like, I do these things, like, it's not for me. It is, but like, it's for you. I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to make this better world, trying to create this environment, this compound where people feel safe, right? He's got this this narrative in his head. And what I thought was so telling about that is that I think that a lot of times as leaders, as humans in general, we do have a narrative in our head. And it's like, this is like what my intention is. But your intention doesn't matter if that's not what's landing on other people. And if that's not the result of what you're actually doing. The results will tell you what it is that your narrative or your policy or your system is doing. And so I just thought that was just really interesting, just when he just started yelling at him, I'm trying to help you.
Frickin' Murphy.
Well, and then when 10K leaves, he sends people after him. So if somebody wants to leave, you don't chase them, right? It's you let them go. They should be able to leave. But he sent people after them. And then I made a note that he believes he's creating a life without fear and desperation. And he also makes the comment where he says, we'll do it my way. So again, not interested in that input from other people at all, but just interested in, I feel like I can do this the best way. Not even I feel like an undeserved confidence that if I met somebody like that in real life, my first question would truly be like, where does this confidence come from? Because unclear timeline wise where this hits.
It's funny. He's creating this life without fear, like you said, and he's trying to help 10K. But the reason why he wants 10K is for security, right? Because he's fearful of everyone else. So it's like, just picking the facts or the realizations that he wants to have. Which, I mean, I wish I couldn't sympathize, but that's neither here nor there. So. The whole Murphy thing is bonkers at this point, because then I think now when you go to Warren and Hector being locked in the cage, I think it's funny too, because I don't know, I think you view this anyway, but you have Hector, who used to be El Scorpion, right? And now there's this other El Scorpion, and he's like, somebody's impersonating me, right? Somebody's like, I just looked at it as like one leader retired, gone, so like, right? Steve Jobs. Well, that's a bad example, but I was gonna say, like, wearing a black turtleneck and acid wash jeans, right? This person's trying to be me right now. You know what I mean? From like a Steve Jobs perspective. Like, I think also, since Hector has that realization that he wasn't the greatest guy, there's like a lot of confusion from him on that. And as they try to figure that out, what I think is interesting from a symbology standpoint, but from a leadership perspective, is the building that they're in, that like joke factory, prop store factory thing. Chaos outside, right? The building's being attacked. It's like they're throwing like fire bombs and things like that. None of that really you can tell is happening. Like, that chaos is happening outside, but Warren and Hector are kind of like having this technical exchange meeting, this little TEM, right? They're problem solving through this, and it's like a lot of chaos going on. Doesn't matter. We need to figure out how to move ahead in this, and so they just like pocketed that out. And I think that's a great skill to have, because I think sometimes in the office things aren't going great. It's kind of craziness. There's deadlines, but we have a problem. We need to block out all those outside issues for the moment so we can really focus in, so we can cut through that noise. So I thought that was a great little exchange that they're having there. But again, that comes back to Warren being a very good leader and being able to take that time, because she knows that Hector's now kind of having this weird existential, like, what do you mean somebody's pretending to be me?
And not even, I also viewed it as not even necessarily pretending to be him, but also like, are these the far-reaching effects of what I've done?
Yeah, that's a really great point.
And so, and I think that can be very humbling too, especially when, like you said, he realized that like he just had a little, a moment where he was like, okay, maybe the way I was living was not maybe the greatest. And him and Warren had a really great interaction regarding his past. And I think that what's so interesting is the dichotomy of this with what's going on with Murphy right now. Murphy has not reconciled anything from his past. He was, whining about things. Yes, I'm a Murphy sympathizer, but also he's just whining about a lot of things. Oh, he doesn't want to do it their way. He wants to do it his own way. Now he kind of has some control to do that. And he's not reconciling anything along the way. But now Hector is reconciling. And Warren says to him, you can't change what you are, but you can change what you do. Use who you are to give us all another chance. Right. So just that thing where it's like your past truly doesn't matter. I know I hear a lot of people, they're like so worried about like being canceled or saying the wrong thing or making somebody feel a certain way. And it's like, we all make mistakes. So of course, go into it, being open. And if you make a mistake, apologize. But at the same time, it's like, we are not so tied to this one thing we did at this one point. Like, it really is like, we have to let each other grow, and we have to accept that we're going to grow and change too, both as people and especially as leaders. Because the leader I was when I was 25, thank goodness, is not the leader that I am now. But if I just decided to be stuck in my ways and be like, oh, I'm never going to change because that's inconsistent and all of that, like, I'd be a monster. I'd just be a monster. I'd be the Murphy version, right? Because he's not getting that feedback, not making those changes, versus you have Hector now, who's like, now he's a great team player. Now he's willing to reconcile the things from his past. He's willing to accept responsibility. Whereas, if we look at Murphy, obviously nowhere near that.
Yeah, that willingness to change piece too. That was something that I struggled with, right? It's like I had these ideas and what was right and wrong, and really, it was a struggle to let go of some of those things, right? Like what right looked like, right? What was trying hard or giving it your all to me was not giving it your all to somebody else, but
Mhm.
they might have still been giving their all, or more than me, right? And so I think that's something to struggle with, of like just not assuming for me, the biggest thing was like always just assuming the worst, right? Oh, everybody was always trying to do as little as possible for the most money, and it was always, like one of those sort of things, and that's not the case, right? But I think I think you can will that sort of attitude into existence if you harp on it too much, right? If you accuse somebody of something all the time, why not do it anyway, right? If you're going to be accused of it, why not just do it? Because it's easier, right? To do less and make as much, right? So that's one example. But like, yeah, that's a really great point about just sort of growing past that.
Well, and to your point too, like, if we hold people in a certain place and we assume these things about them, at what point do they then actually become that person? Right. So not everybody can be as strong mentally. Mental toughness it's a lot more difficult than people think. It's like, I know people love to like just paint with this broad brush, like you can control you can, but it's like, that's a skill that's a muscle that has to be worked, and it has to be worked consistently. So I think, yeah, sometimes there are like environments where it's like, is this a result of this environment? Is this person an absolute monster, or is this person doing this because of that? So I know that it's like, speaking to my own experience, I would definitely say that there were work environments where I was working very hard, but I was a toxic team member because I was not doing the things I needed to help my own resilience and my own, mental health and how I was showing up and my mindset. And then the environment compounded that. So those two things coming together, right? So I was equally responsible, but also the environment just made it so that it was like, yeah, I did not show up the way I wanted to. But in the moment, I also couldn't see that. I was just equating, I made all these excuses for myself, why I was showing up that way, didn't feel like I needed to change, didn't care if anybody else changed. So I think that there's that element of it as well.
Yeah. Sorry, that got me thinking, because the next thing I want to talk about is like, we've talked about this a lot, right? How well like formed the team is now. So you have Sunmay, Doc, and Addie. That Addie's got like a tooth infection, something like that, right? Toothache.
Mhm.
And what I think is interesting is they are separated from Warren and Hector, and it's right. They have their own issue for their own thing, and I think that's so, and they're dealing with it effectively, right? They're taking strengths, right? Sunmay has a medical background, so a little bit more informed about, chompers. Doc is,
Doc.
yeah, I was gonna say, like an anesthesiologist. So I just, they are focusing in on the thing that they can control right now, and so like it's that dynamic that like I would I crave to at work, is to have, we can all know what the goal A is, and realize that there's going to be A1, A2, a B6 is going to come in there like randomly, that's going to be important for somebody, and just like that effective team, and how they're just all working together and can form these smaller teams within the team very quickly. There's like a well understood like structure and who's got what strength, and I just think it's so neat. It's like one of my favorite little things to watch about this show too.
I think it's also something like when you see that in real life, when you see a team that is just strong, and to witness that or just like observe pieces of that, I think that can be really inspiring too.
Unfortunately, most of the teams that I've ever like joined in on, right? Teams that I wasn't there for, like the establishment. A lot of times, the main binding factor is like commisery. And so it's like they are making the best of what they all perceive as a bad situation, but it's just like that energy is always so negative, right? It's never, everything is always a mountain to climb. It doesn't matter how big or how small, they're always climbing a mountain with everything. And that is just so draining. You know what I mean? It turns an 8-hour workday into an 80-hour straight workday, you know? And
Right.
so I think these guys are in a worse situation than any team I've ever worked on, right? Just because I have not lived through the zombie apocalypse yet. And they don't do that. And I think that they can still be upset, right? They can still complain with each other, but like you know what I mean? It's like, how do you capture that? How do you change that mindset of maybe this isn't the best situation, right? You respect that that's somebody's viewpoint, but how do you turn that around?
I think that's such a great call out too, because some teams are brought together. I'm not even going to say they're good, but they seem more cohesive because it's not about them actually getting things done. And it's not about them actually making progress. It's about them all hating the same thing.
Yep.
And that's why they seem to get along so well. You're like, oh, they've got great dynamics. Yeah. When other people hate the same things you hate, it's easy to get along. And so I think what's so unique about this team too is they're brought together by not only a mission, right? They believe in that, they stand for one another, but also by them each having these different strengths and these different strengths that they can add to, that they can advocate for themselves for and for each other for. So I think that that's what also makes this great. You can always have great teammates where it's like, oh yeah, this isn't great. I don't love this, but that doesn't become then the core of who the group is. Or I know exactly what you mean. I've definitely seen some groups where it's like the core of who they are is we're going to hate someone or something. And that's who we are. And it's like, cool. I'm glad you're so connected. No work got done. So then I'm going to kind of skip to something at the end unless you had something else.
No, I think we pretty much covered everything in the middle for the most part.
So now we get to a point, and I think that this is a really important point to discuss, and that's where Dr. Murch, she's now been bitten twice by Murphy. She still has some semblance of personhood, even though she's been bitten twice. And so she opts to unalive herself by going into a horde of zombies and letting them take her or, eat her body or whatever. And so I thought that, I mean, of course, tragic, but also at the same time, it's so interesting where it's like, again, if we go back to somebody in a position of authority like Murphy, where it's like, he doesn't get it. He does not care about people. He does not care about their autonomy. And she was so desperate to get away from his control that being unalived was better than being part of that group and part of that vision. And so, of course, we have that dichotomy with like Warren and how she motivates a team. But I think it's also really important to mention that it's like, if people around you are leaving, if you have high attrition, if you have people who are just consistently disengaged, maybe you have low ESAT or like manager scores or anything like that, like those are all data that you need to be paying attention to. I'm not saying it's the end all be all, but those are all like indicators that people are really struggling. And John Clifton did this study on happiness where he was talking about people who are happy at work. There's actually a huge gap between that and people who are miserable at work. But the whole thing is that like some people are miserable at work, right? More heart attacks on Mondays, more like stuff like that, where it's like they are really willing to sacrifice their personhood and their well-being, because they need a job or they're in a position where they can't leave or whatever. And so if more leaders could actually look at that, you can't make everybody happy, but can we make people less miserable? And so that's where it's like with Warren, like she's talking to Hector. He's obviously having a moment. She gives him this motivational speech. She does it with everybody. She is there to inject that little, like she's just there to show them the next step so they can gain traction and move forward. And with this Dr. Murch thing, I just think it goes to show that like Murphy does not have those skills at all.
Yeah, two things. Number one, more heart attacks on Mondays. Great band name. Number two is, I think you to the point with the people being miserable and I want to be there. I think something that's so interesting too is when you're talking about looking at the data. I've been on teams before in the past where very high turnover, right? Always, and there's maybe like one person or two people that like they've been there since the beginning, and like those people often, in my experience, right? Not speaking for everything, but in my experience, those people tend to be the problem why everyone leaves the team, right? Because they're toxic employees, they're toxic teammates, and what compounds that issue is when you have leadership or leaders that are so far removed because they don't care, right? Like, oh, that's just a problem team. They roll over, they gave up on that goal, that mission, whatever that team was doing. And then it's like it's like stupidly, they will praise, promote, give favor to the people that stuck around because it's like, you're here working in the trenches for me. No, they're the problem why your trenches are empty. You know what I mean? Like and so that's like really sitting down and looking. And so somewhat pessimistically now, when I fall in on a team, when I join a new organization, I look at the people who've been there the longest, and have they been there the longest because they believe in the mission, they love it, and they're great people to be around, or has everyone else just sort of pocketed them off and shoved them in a corner and they don't even care about them anymore, right? It's like there's no helping them, not my problem, right? So it's like, you just got to kind of look at those things. And I think a lot of times people will just read the data wrong. Been here the longest, must know the most. Maybe not, right? Maybe not. Or, been here the longest, must be the most committed. Also, maybe not.
Right. Must be the most loyal, must be the most, we put all these things on it when, like you said, the data says otherwise.
Yeah.
Data's in, does not say that. So yeah, absolutely.
Whatever that saying is, see the forest for the ducks, or however it goes.
I think you nailed it. Good job.
Thank you.